I remember this commercial from when I was a kid, pretty young. And it's a video store commercial, and for the life of me, I can't remember if it's a commercial for Major Video, which was the video store chain in Rhode Island when I was really young, or Blockbuster Video, which was the major nationwide chain that bought it out eventually. But it's about it's a family. I think it's like raining. I'm pretty sure it's a husband, a wife, and a kid. And the wife has like a dour face and was like, make sure you get a good movie or something. And he goes up to the video store, and it's been decimated, wiped out. Everything has been rented except for one single movie, and it's a VHS copy of the movie Ishtar. And I was really young whenever this commercial came out. And for the life of me, I looked for this commercial. I could not find it on YouTube. I asked my followers on Twitter if they had heard about it, and nobody responded. So I was looking for this video, but I couldn't find it. But that commercial was the first instance where I'd ever heard of Ishtar. And obviously, I was able to get from context clues of the commercial that Ishtar was not a very good movie. Now, I've never actually seen the full movie Ishtar, but I have seen bits and pieces of it, either from clips online or when I was a little bit later from that commercial as a kid, Comedy Central, back in the days where Penn Jillette did the commercials, and was like, here on Comedy Central, they would show Ishtar, and a lot of the advertisements that would say, like, hey, we're showing Ishtar, would always play up that it was this bad movie or whatever. And so it's always had this reputation as being a pretty horrible movie and one of the biggest bombs of all time. And it was basically from that original video store commercial and later from the Comedy Central bumpers promoting their showing of it that I was familiar with the world around Ishtar, basically. Now, later on, I get older, I become more into film, and one of the interests, the niche interests, I suppose, that I'm really flabbergasted by, or that I really have a lot of interest in, is these spectacular bombs. These movies that, maybe there's some other movies that have actually been a bigger bomb just from a financial standpoint, but there are these epic megaton bombs that like change the landscape and end up getting a larger reputation because of it. Probably one of the biggest examples is the movie that killed New Hollywood, which is Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. This guy, he won Best Director for The Deer Hunter. That gives him carte blanche to make his auteur deconstruction of the Western epic, and then critics hate it. And then the studio gets panicked and like recuts it, and then it bombs. It ruins his career. It was so expensive that it bankrupted United Artists Studios, and it was this whole big kerfuffle. And then years later, the original cut is restored. Criterion helps it. They put this out, and the movie gets this historical reassessment. And that's not terribly uncommon, where you see these movies that were big bombs, and then people years later, after all of the cultural milieu that came out of it, take it out of the original context, and it's like, if we just judge this as a work and not as something that was piled on by the media or was part of this other financial fiasco, does that film still hold up? And sometimes the answer is yes. I mean, a lot of people nowadays will defend Heaven's Gate. I think it's a pretty good movie, but it's flawed. I'm not saying like, oh, it was a hidden masterpiece or anything. And then there are movies like Howard the Duck, which I like. I liked it as a kid. It's not a terribly good movie. It's not a hidden gem, but it was maybe slightly unjustly maligned. Then you have movies like Cutthroat Island, that pirate movie with Gina Davis, that was also a huge fiasco. You have, right now I'm listening to the TCM podcast about the making of the film adaptation of Bonfire of the Vanities. Another film I haven't actually seen, though I did read the novel Bonfire of the Vanities in my 20s. And I was just kind of familiar with the idea that Tom Hanks was horribly miscast and everything like that. Listening to the podcast has been very interesting as well, as far as why these bad decisions about that movie were being made. The Postman, the Kevin Costner movie, which I actually really love. The Postman. It might actually be a Dave's Faves video at some point, but it was a big bomb and most people did not like it. But it's those kind of like gigantic fiascos, the ones that are like how did this get made? This lost so much money, it ruined careers. That sort of movie is very fascinating to me. So Ishtar is one of those movies. I'm not going to go into all of the nitty-gritty about the making of the movie. There's a great... I believe Peter Biskind wrote a biography about Warren Beatty, and there's a section of that has a really good breakdown of what happened for the making of Ishtar. And I think Variety or Vanity Fair or one of the V sites, you can read a pretty lengthy excerpt if you're interested in that. But just for a little bit of background, Ishtar is a comedy movie from the early 1980s that stars Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman and was written and directed by Elaine May. Elaine May is kind of mostly known for her screenwriting stuff, among other things, and it has to do a lot with Ishtar. She was a ghostwriter or a script doctor on Warren Beatty's Reds, the movie that he won Best Director for, 3-hour-plus movie about early 20th century American communism and the Russian Revolution, so obviously a favorite film of mine. But she had done some script doctoring stuff on that, some script doctoring on Tootsie, the Dustin Hoffman film. And it seems like after all of the work that Elaine May did on Reds, which was a movie that was going over budget, and Warren Beatty was shooting reams of film, and Paramount was afraid that it was just going to bomb spectacularly, but ended up becoming kind of an Oscar darling. Don't remember how it did at the box office, though. It came out before I was born. He wanted to sort of give Elaine May thanks by basically helping her make whatever movie she wanted to make. And her idea was to make this road movie, kind of like the old Dean Martin movies, Bob Hope, where they'd go to different locations and it'd be very humorous. If you're older and don't remember the 1940s, this is kind of parodied a little bit on Family Guy with the Road to Whatever shows that Stewie and Brian do, like Road to Rhode Island. By the way, I grew up in Rhode Island. There's no reason to ever go there. It's a fucking cesspool. Stay the hell away from Rhode Island. But she wanted to make a movie like that. And so Warren Beatty was like, hey, I'll come on as a producer, because every movie I've made as producer has been a hit, so, I can get stuff greenlit. And then Dustin Hoffman, because he sort of owed a little bit to Elaine May for Tootsie, he reluctantly joined, but he had some questions about it. And basically Beatty and Hoffman play this sort of like Simon and Garfunkel type of not very good musical duo, and through various machinations, they sort of end up in Morocco between a fight between the American CIA and Moroccan rebels or something like that. And, it was very expensive, and it seemed like Elaine may not have had the best grasp over how to direct, like, very large scenes, and there was a lot of kerfuffle about the making of it. There was also, I think at the time, this was bankrolled by Columbia Pictures, which at the time was owned by Coca-Cola before they ended up selling it to Sony. And there was like a change of the guard as far as the producers involved, and one of the producers may have sort of like kneecapped it in the press and a bunch of other stuff. But basically it was this big budget comedy with some big stars, and it came out and it bombed and critics hated it and it was maligned. So maligned that it didn't even get a DVD release. It eventually got a Blu-ray release of a director's cut. After an initial Blu-ray release of the theatrical cut was pulled at the last minute. And some of those copies of the theatrical cut, they come up on eBay every now and then. I think they're all Canadian, but it's basically like a fell off a truck situation where, they didn't sell, but they were still made, so you can still find some of those. But otherwise, the director's cut is still widely available. It's a bare bones disc. And the difference between the theatrical cut and the director's cut seems to be that the director's cut actually took out between 2 and 3 minutes of some of the material, which I hear the reason this was done was at the behest of Elaine May, because some of those jokes are racially or culturally insensitive, given hindsight. So, cut to a couple months ago, where it was announced that Indicator, which is a UK boutique Blu-ray label, was going to put out a special edition of Ishtar. So Ishtar, with the theatrical cut and the director's cut, and a bunch of extras. And so some people, such as me, were pretty excited about this, because, It's a famous bomb, but it's going to have extras to put it into context, and it's going to have both versions of it. And the fact that I personally have never seen the full movie from beginning to end, only bits and pieces of it, I was looking forward to sort of sort of blind buying it. And then, about a month ago, it was canceled. And Indicator released a little notice, press release, something like that, canceling it. And the cancellation notice said, we're saddened to report that due to legal complications, Powerhouse Films, which I think is the parent company of Indicator, will no longer be publishing Elaine May's Ishtar on Blu-ray. They go on to say how it's a big disappointment, especially because they had already completed all of the work on it, and stuff about refunding it. And they basically said also at the end, on this occasion, we just weren't able to win the necessary battles and didn't want to disappoint with a severely compromised edition. So some of the language in there perked my interest, because you basically had almost a completed product, and legal complications are specifically mentioned as the reason they didn't put it out, but then they also mention a severely compromised edition, which indicates that they possibly had an option to release it, but they had to make changes to do that. And part of me was like, this seems odd. So, it perhaps works a little bit to give sort of an overview of how these boutique things work. And I'm by no means an expert about any of the business backroom stuff, but in a very simplistic way, company owns movie. Well, it may not be company, it could be an individual producer or one of the stakeholders, but someone owns the rights to an old movie. And then someone else, a company, will attempt to find the person who owns the rights to the movie, assuming that they're the ones chasing it, and they'll work out a licensing deal where it's like, we have permission to take the thing you own and put it out on disc and then sell it. And obviously you get some sort of money, whether it's a cut of the profits, whether it's an upfront and both or what have you. And there can be limitations to the contract. Could be you can only make X number of them for a limited edition, or you can make them in perpetuity, and all that stuff. So they'll usually find the rights holder, they'll obtain the rights for everything involved, so the movie, if there's extra music rights and other stuff. Sometimes these older movies can be complicated because of how the contracts were drawn at the time. But they'll try to get all of the rights so that they know that legally they are allowed to put this out on disc. And then they'll go out and they'll produce special features, they'll interview people or come up with essays, and they'll pay to have people take part in them and edit those packages and create all this stuff. So there's a lot of legal stuff that goes on in the background to make sure they have the right to put it out, and the nuance of what they're allowed to do with it, if they can commission new cover art or have to use the old one, and there's rights to a lot of things besides the film in and of itself. And then beyond that, they will make the extras for it, and they'll produce those and edit them and make sure they have the rights for all of that stuff, and then they'll put a package together and sell it. And about a month from the actual release date, because as I'm recording this, the original release date was going to be 2 days from when I'm recording this, the Tuesday of this week, they announced that it can't happen. And that seems odd, because normally you would make sure you had all of your legal ducks in a row before you even embarked on all of that hard work with the lawyers and the contracts and the producing of the special features. And the special features on this were pretty healthy. It was a pretty large number of special features, just looking at what the website had. So they were doing a 2K restoration. They never said whether it was from the negative or an interpositive or what it was restoring, but there was some sort of restoration. They're going to have both versions of the film, the theatrical cut from 1987, late 80s, my apologies, I said early 80s earlier, and then the director's cut, which came out in 2013. They have it listed as 108 minutes for the theatrical and 105 for the director's, so a 3-minute difference there. Different soundtracks, an audio commentary with 2 writers or editors of a book about Elaine May, an archival recording between Elaine May and director Mike Nichols about it, an interview with the songwriter who wrote the quote-unquote bad songs for the movie. And as you can see from here, like some of these, like the conversation is 70 minutes, with this other featurette is 23 minutes. These are pretty hefty, chunky extras. These aren't like 5-minute little piffle things to thrown away. And then an interview with someone else who knows Elaine May, a documentary about the film that runs for 46 minutes, a Q&A with Richard Linklater and some other stuff discussing the movie, a video comparison between the theatrical and the director's cut, and then a booklet with an essay and all this good stuff. So basically, there's a lot of work in here, and there's a lot of really substantive extras that were part of this package. So when I look at the language that they announced the cancellation of, legal complications specifically, that basically means they did not have the rights to something. There was something they could not put in this that they were planning for. And the idea of a severely compromised, meaning that they could have potentially taken something out or some things out, but they felt that doing that would just make it overall not a product worth putting out. What the hell could that be? Because to even get involved with starting the work, you would have thought you had all your ducks in a row, only to find out at the 11th hour that you did not. So I don't know, but I'm going to guess. And if anybody knows better, leave a comment below, please. The theatrical cut was originally set to come out on Blu-ray after not being out on DVD at all. And the reason it wasn't out on DVD could just be studio embarrassment or people believing there's no market for it because it was such a big bomb, that kind of thing. So the fact that it was never on DVD doesn't concern me so much. The idea that it was about to be released on Blu-ray, like discs were pressed and shrink-wrapped and all of that, and pulled at the last minute, indicates that someone raised a stink at the last minute, much like now. And then later that director's cut came out, and that's out, so there's clearly no problem with the director's cut being in circulation. But there is potentially a problem with the theatrical cut being in circulation. The only thing I can think of is that the people who have the rights to Ishtar, which I'm assuming is still Columbia Pictures, so I guess Sony would still own the rights now, unless it's with a producer or something, did not have all of the rights they think they do. And like, how can you have the rights but not have the rights? Well, there may have been some clauses in some contracts. So I went back and I looked at some stuff about the making of Ishtar, just to see if I could find any clues to any rights issues. And what I found was that there was a very particular agreement on this film about Final Cut, where Final Cut was basically jointly shared between Elaine May, Warren Beatty, and Dustin Hoffman, so your three big stakeholders in this film. And that, when this movie got into post-production and there were sort of fights about how to craft this thing together, all three of them basically had their own specific edits of like what take they wanted to use, and they just sort of did a hodgepodge after showing it to people and voting on it. So you had this weird three-way final cut on this movie. And I'm wondering if the language from that contract also means that all three of these people have final sign-off on whether something can be released. So I see two options here. Either one of the stakeholders does not want the theatrical cut out at all, which, if that's the case, then there's one extra, which is the comparison, and the actual theatrical cut on the disc would not be able to be released. That seems likely. And then the other option is that in one of the extras, so something that, they didn't know what was going to be said or contained in the extra until the disc was ready to go out, somebody said something that somebody didn't want to be said. So I would say the possible culprits behind this, because I don't think Dustin Hoffman cares. I'm just going to say that. when I've seen quotes about this movie that he's given out during interviews, he basically says that it's like a C plus B minus type of movie, that it's like an okay comedy. So I don't think he's terribly embarrassed by this movie. And also, I mean, he's had, there was like sexual harassment allegations about him like a year or two ago. So I think he's got more important things to worry about if people are going to talk about him than, how he behaved on the set of Ishtar in '87. But I could see two possible things as the roadblock. The first is that it has to do with this theatrical cut, and that if the director's cut is the shorter version, that would indicate that Elaine May wants that version out, but that could also mean that Elaine May does not want the theatrical version out, so maybe if Elaine May has final word on what goes out, she put the kibosh on that and on the comparison extra. And then the other thing is that Warren Beatty is sometimes known for being very particular about whether people say bad things about him. And it's quite possible that somebody on one of these extras may have said something not very nice about Warren Beatty, and he put the kibosh on it because of some similar clause. Like, for instance, it looks like most of these extras are about Elaine May, whether it's her conversation with Nichols or another filmmaker being interviewed about Elaine May's work or something like that. So it may possibly be that there are Elaine May stans on the extras who are not very kind about Warren Beatty. And as far as I know, from what I've read, Elaine May and Warren Beatty kind of fell out after the making of this movie, like they didn't talk to each other again or anything like that. So that's also quite possible. And that would make sense as far as the timing is concerned, because, he may have been like, okay, yeah, put this out. And then the extras come out and be like, I don't like that. No. And then that happens. Or it could just be that, Indicator went to Columbia or went to Sony, and they got all the rights from them, but then there was a clause that they missed, and then Elaine May got wind of it and decided to invoke her lawyers, and then they put the kibosh on it. Those are what I see as the two most likely scenarios here as far as why this got canceled at almost the very last minute. And that sort of is where we're left off, I guess. So if you want the theatrical cut of Ishtar, I mean, aside from hunting down a VHS copy, they're occasionally they do show up on eBay. They don't have a red thing at the top that says director's cut, and they usually have a sticker that says like not on DVD or something. You can usually find those. My guess is the prices of those will skyrocket a little bit, or not skyrocket. It's Ishtar, but they'll go up a little bit, knowing that this other version is canceled now. But you can find that if you want the theatrical cut, or if you're okay with the director's cut, that's pretty widely available from anywhere you buy Blu-rays online or whatever. But will we ever see a special edition? Will these extras ever come up anywhere? Will Indicator work something else out? I mean, it said on there that this release was limited to 3,000 editions, or 3,000 copies. So, did they press the discs and have them shrink wrapped? Are they going to burn those? Will they fall off a truck and wind up on eBay from some guy in London selling them? No clue. But it's quite possible that maybe one of these things will come out, or at least some of the extras might, if the individual extra in and of itself isn't the problem, whether it's the Q&A or what have you, stuff that maybe is not 100% created by Indicator, but they at least got the rights to put it on the disc. I guess that's also an option. If some of these extras weren't commissioned by Indicator and they worked out a deal and it fell through and you couldn't put the extra on there anymore, that's also a possibility. But I'm just kind of pontificating because this kind of thing doesn't happen very often. Probably I remember two examples mostly from the DVD days. The first was about Little Shop of Horrors, where there was a DVD release of Little Shop of Horrors that was going to have the original ending, where the Don't Feed the Plants song and you see the plants destroy the world. And then that was pulled at the last minute, and then some of those copies that were still made, because they still pressed the discs and everything, those wound up on eBay and some other places too, and you could find bootlegs at conventions. And I forget, I think the reason was one of the producers, maybe David Geffen, didn't sign off on it at the last minute, so they had to cut it. I also believe at that time they only had a black and white copy of it, and since then, Like, I have the director's cut on a Blu-ray Steelbook, and I forget if the movie's come out on 4K yet or not. But now, that ending is widely available on most of the special edition releases, and it's in color now. In fact, when I went to... there was a Fathom event screening of Little Shop of Horrors a couple of years ago, around the Halloween area, and I got to see it for the first time on the big screen, and it's one of my favorite movies, and I'd never seen it in theaters before. I'd always seen it on like HBO and stuff, because it came out when I was really young. And that theatrical re-release for that Fathom events it had that old original theatrical or director's cut ending as opposed to theatrical ending, and I had never seen it in full before in color, so that was the first time I had seen that. But that was a big example where they made the disc, they didn't have all the rights to one of the extras, so it got pulled, and later on at least it came out, so we did get to see it. It wasn't hidden away forever, whatever the intricacies were with the rights. And then another one was Tim Burton's Ed Wood, which is also an excellent film. There was a DVD that was either, I don't know if it got to being pressed, but it was at least announced, and then it was canceled at the last minute. And then, for the longest time, Ed Wood was not on DVD at all. And then finally, it seemed like almost years after it was originally announced, it finally got released on DVD. And the reason I heard behind that was there was an extra, which I think is an outtake, of Bill Murray singing a song, and they didn't have the rights to have the song in it. And I believe it was just a music rights thing, and music rights are always very tricky. That's what kept the Heavy Metal movie off of VHS for a very long time. For the longest time, that movie was not available at all on any home media, and it was because of music rights. I also think it's the movie called American Anthem or something like one of the other animated movies like that also had a lot of rock music. There's music rights are very difficult with some movies, especially older ones where the original contracts didn't have that spelled out for a home video release because home video didn't exist when some of those movies came out. So it's not unprecedented for a movie to be announced and pressed and ready to be released and then pulled at the last minute for some sort of legal snafu. But in both the cases of Little Shop of Horrors and Ed Wood, those extras did end up coming out eventually. The DVD I have of Ed Wood has that extra on it. They sorted it out. So hopefully it is possible that the movie will come out with extras because the director's cut's available. Or at least the theatrical cut might be available, hopefully someday, in a non-leaked eBay version. Because if my general belief about movies that are tinkered with after the fact is that I'm okay with it as long as the original cut, or the theatrical cut, whatever you want to call it, is still available in some form. So, like, Blade Runner, there's like 5 fucking cuts of it, but they're all available, they're all in print, you can find your favorite cut. As opposed to Star Wars, where, George Lucas and Lucasfilm, they never want to release the original unspecialized editions. That leaves it to like fan edit people to try to do that from like up-resed video. And there's other reasons where sometimes I'll prefer a censored version. The like Cannibal Holocaust, there's the Grindhouse DVD release. I believe the Blu-ray has it as well. Has an animal cruelty-free version where it just cuts out, it skips the animal cruelty through seamless branching. It's like I've seen the original movie uncut 2 times, once on Joe Bob and once when I first saw it. I don't need to see a monkey get its head chopped off again. It's not my thing, so I can watch that version, but I don't believe that the original version should not be available. So that's my general consensus. So I hope that if the reason it's not released is because the theatrical version is being suppressed because of cultural insensitives, I hope that version can still be out there, because, there's many movies that are culturally insensitive, and I think it's important to preserve them as a cultural artifact so we know everything about the societal conditions that led to that. So, Al Jolson in blackface in The Jazz Singer, the entire movie of Birth of a Nation, Song of the South. I still think these movies should still be available in their regular form, and it's okay to contextualize them. I think what HBO Max did with Gone with the Wind is that should be the standard. That should be the standard bearer for how to do it, where you can see the movie, you can watch the entire movie uncut, but they've added context. And if you don't want the context, you don't have to watch their little thing, but they've made that little extra before it where it puts the entire film into its cultural and artistic and historical context, so you can better, conceptualize why this movie was made the way it was. It's sort of like taking a film class while you're watching the movie, and I think that's perfectly. I think that's the absolute right decision to make for hashtag problematic material in films, is to not censor them and not bury them away, but to make sure that they are contextualized so people understand them and don't necessarily see them in a vacuum as some racist piece of crap. So hopefully we'll get something, but it seems like right now the kibosh is put on it because of some sort of legal stuff. So anyway, that's my way too long video about Ishtar. So what do you think? Did you want to buy Ishtar in Blu-ray? Have you seen Ishtar? Do you think it's unfairly maligned? Do you think it really is the piece of shit that everyone says it is? Leave a comment below. And as always, like, subscribe, hit the bell, all the internet things, that people ask for. You can follow me on Letterboxd if you're wondering what I'm watching. I gave 4 stars to Nicolas Cage's Pig. That was an excellent film. And you can follow me on Twitter for that and various communist bullshit that I post. So, thanks everybody. Have a good one.